What up, everybody? Colton Core back out with another video. This one is going to be my PS4 collection for 2020 and will mark the last collection video I will be doing for 2020. Before I get into the collection video itself, I'd just like to give a quick thanks for anybody that has been commenting, liking, and subscribing to my channel over the past 2 years. The PS4 collection and PS3 collection kind of mark the yearly anniversary of my channel because it started with just collection videos. So anybody who's shown interest in the channel at all throughout that time, I really appreciate it. Kind of lets me know like what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and shows that there's still a reason to be putting out these videos. I'd probably still put them out. Just having people being interested and, you know, me just talking about games and interacting, giving their thoughts in the comments about certain games. It's just a fun experience and I really appreciate it. So with that being said, for the collection video, I'm going to try to keep it short and sweet for games I've already talked about in my previous 2 collection videos. I still have all the ratings of them. I have them sticky note on each game, so I'll know what ratings are when I talk about them. I can give a quick overview of each and every game. And then the ones I haven't talked about previously, recently picked up, or have recently played through that I didn't play through in the time that I've made the other collections, I will expand more upon and get into greater detail about those. So without further ado, let's just get right into it. Alright, so these first games are going to be the games that I have not played yet. They're either going to be games I've picked up recently or have had previously and just never gotten to. So this first one is one that I have picked up recently and really hope to get into soon because I really enjoyed the original, and it's just SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom. This is the remaster of a classic Xbox, PS2, and GameCube game. A SpongeBob, almost like Mario 64, where it's like a platformer action game mixed into one and is in the SpongeBob universe. The original is awesome and one of my childhood favorites. I just hope it lives up to the previous ones. Alright, next up is Kingdom Come Deliverance. I actually started this game. I got partway through it, and then I forget what came out, but something took my interest away from this. I think it might have been Outer Worlds. So I got into that, kind of dropped this game. From what I played of it, it was decent, but I didn't get far enough in it to properly give it a rating. I hope to go back to it eventually. And I know I'm going to get a lot of hate about this one, but Red Dead 2 is still in my haven't played pile. It's been in it for the last year as well. I've partly played it. I've gotten through 2 chapters of it. I still hold the view that I think the original Red Dead's better from what I've played of it. I've heard it gets a lot more interesting near middle to the end of the game. So I'm hoping it will hold my interest a little more to the end of the game, but it's still a solid game. Alright, then we got the 2 Uncharted games I still haven't played. I figured just do this in one to get them both out of the way. Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, and Uncharted The Lost Legacy. Both I'm just waiting because I've kind of been lazy on playing PS3 games, so I haven't finished Uncharted 3 yet, and I'm looking to do that before I get into either of these because I like to play games in order. Alright, next up is Medieval. This is a remaster or HD remake of the original PS1 game called Medieval, where you play as Sir Daniel Fortescue, and you basically go around kind of like as a comic-y, like medieval realm where a wizard brings up a bunch of undead monsters and you're trying to save the realm. So I'm hoping this one holds up. I've heard it's actually a pretty one-for-one remake, so I'm looking forward to get into it. This is another one I've picked up pretty recently, which is We Happy Few. I've heard this game is one that you either love it or hate it. I know there's a lot of mixed reviews about this. I've heard it's decent. The whole like multiple different stories, how they all interconnect, and the kind of atmosphere this game goes for is what got me interested in it. So I'm hoping the story and combat's good enough to keep me interested throughout the game. Next up is Sniper Elite 3. Haven't started it yet, but I've played the second one, and it's a decent bit of fun. I find the mechanics kind of get a little tiresome and repetitive near the end of the game, but hopefully I can get into this one. I've heard it's pretty decent. Then we got Styx. This is a third-person stealth game, one I haven't got into yet. I'm hoping to get into it. Stealth games one I really have to be in the mood for, and I really have to sit down and just want to play through the entire thing. I haven't really been in that mood yet, so hopefully when it comes around, this one can fill my itch for one. Alright, so the first one of the games I've already played through is Assassin's Creed Black Flag. I gave this one an 8, mainly because it's my favorite Assassin's Creed game. I really enjoy the pirate mechanics in this. It's basically like your typical Assassin's Creed mechanic, but they've added in boat combat, which I'm pretty sure got added in Rogue first. But this one kind of perfects it. It's in the pirate era, which is a really fun era to play through. And it's just kind of one of those good Assassin's Creed games where the story's interesting and the combat's still fun. Alright, next up is Assassin's Creed Unity. I gave this one a 5 when I was originally doing it. I'd stick with that. The only thing that really bothers me about this game is how bad it was when it first came out. It was really glitchy, there was a lot of bugs, and it just was kind of unplayable. I've heard it's actually pretty decent if you go back to it now. I just haven't had a reason to. Alright, the next up is Battlefield 4. In my opinion, one of the better Battlefields. I really enjoyed the multiplayer in this game. The campaign was pretty decent, kind of just the average modern first-person shooter campaign. But the multiplayer in this I found really good. I'd give it a 7.5. Alright, the next up is Battlefield 1. This one I'd give the same rating as a 7.5, but for the opposite reasons. I actually really enjoyed the campaign in this. I like that there was different eras in terms of different parts in the war, and different locations that you would go through and play through like mini short campaigns with different characters. I found that really interesting. The multiplayer didn't really grab my attention as much as Battlefield 4. Like whenever I had an itch to go play a Battlefield multiplayer, I'd just go back to 4. So I'd give this one a 7.5, but more for the campaign. Alright, the next up is Battlefront 2. It's kind of a controversial game. Right at the start, really had issues with microtransactions and greedy loot boxes that were kind of pay to win, and the lack of content in this game really pushed people to hate on this game. I didn't get the game when it originally came out, so I'm not tainted by that in my view, but I understand why people don't like this game. I find if you go back to the multiplayer now, it's really fun. They've updated it, and they keep on updating it with free content. So I gave it a 7. Alright, next up is BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle. This is one I was really hyped when it came out. I'm a big fan of the BlazBlue games and enjoy the Persona Arena game. Compared to traditional BlazBlue combat, they kind of just made it in the stylish format where square gives you like a setup combo of like 6, and then all the special abilities are really easy to pull off. It's kind of like a casual version of BlazBlue, but it's still fun to play. I'd give it a 7.6. Alright, Borderlands 3. This is one I was very hyped when they announced it. I really enjoy the previous Borderlands games. And for any of you who've seen my worst PS4 games of all time, this one made the list, mainly because the story is awful. All the characters are awful in this game besides a couple, and the bosses and campaign missions are just very boring, stale, and super easy. The only things that are good in this game is the combat, vehicle combat, and the looting is still great. They're still excellent, as the Borderlands series always has been. But my main issue with this is they didn't add a lot to it, and the story is probably one of the worst I've played in a video game in a while, which is saying a lot. So I'd give this game like a 3. Alright, next up is Bound by Flames. This is kind of one of the RPGs that not a lot of people talk about. It came out early in the PS4 life cycle. It's a third-person hack-and-slash game. I enjoyed playing through it. The story's decent. It's nothing super groundbreaking, but it definitely holds your attention through the entire game. It kind of plays like The Witcher almost, in terms of like how the hack-and-slash combat work. It's a lot of roll, get a couple swings in, do your little ability, roll, dodge kind of thing. Some of the bosses are a little cheap, but it's overall still a pretty good RPG game if you're looking to get an RPG fix in. I'd give it a 7. Alright, next up, first of the Call of Duty games. I'm going to keep the Call of Duty reviews very short. Advanced Warfare. Didn't really like the multiplayer, but the campaign was actually pretty good. Jetpacks and like jump boost things are really stupid. I never really enjoyed them. It's part of the reason why I'm not a huge Halo fan. But I'll give it a 6. Black Ops 3, in my opinion, one of the better multiplayers Call of Duty has put out. They still have the stupid jumping and running on walls mechanics, but there's no like actual jetpacks. The multiplayer was fun enough. Campaign's okay. I'd give it a 7. It's a solid Call of Duty game. The next up is Call of Duty Black Ops 4. This one didn't really have a campaign, so I didn't stick too much with it. The multiplayer and zombies were decent, but the lack of a campaign kind of makes this game useless past when people are going to be playing on the servers. So for that, I gave it a 5. Alright, next up is Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. This one, I hated the multiplayer on, didn't really get into it. I picked this game up really late and when it came out, but I enjoyed the campaign and zombies a lot. I found the campaign one of the more interesting ones I've played throughout the Call of Duty franchise, and the zombies was actually pretty good, at least the first map they gave you. I find this game one of the more underrated Call of Duties. If you're looking for a campaign to play through, that's what I'd recommend this game for, nothing else really. I'd give it a 7.3. Alright, next up is Call of Duty World War II. This is what I would call one of the more balanced Call of Duty games, if you're into the Call of Duty series. Had a pretty good multiplayer, pretty good campaign, and the zombies was pretty decent. If you're looking for a Call of Duty that would offer you everything in like one and it's all done pretty well, I'd recommend this Call of Duty if people are still on the servers. I don't know 100% if people are still playing this game. I'm sure there'll be a few. So I'd give it a 7.4. Alright, next up is one of the newer games I've played through, and that is Catherine Full Body. This is like the Steelbook edition, so I think it's all the Steelbook edition for people who get on the PS4. But this is a really interesting game. I'm not a huge puzzle fan, but this game got me into it. So this game's kind of like I would say dating sim almost, mixed with a puzzle game. It's definitely an interesting game. The storytelling and the characters in this game are all very interesting. There's a lot of comedy elements to it. It's one of those games that the story kind of, even if you're not into puzzle games, will keep you interested throughout the whole thing, keeping you going with the puzzle mechanics. And the mechanics themselves aren't hard in terms of learning to do it on easier settings, but when you get to the harder settings or later levels, it gets pretty tricky. So I give this game probably an 8. Alright, so next up is another new game to the collection for this year, and that's Clash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. So this is a mixture of the first 2 kart racing games from the Clash series. I actually really enjoyed this game. I thought they did the racing mechanics pretty well. They're pretty one for one from the originals. The only thing I wish they included in this is some of the maps from the Crash Team Racing game, which is I think the 3rd one they released in the series. Either way, it's still a really fun game, very true to the original games, and it's one of those remasters that's done really well, and the addition of online and being able to race other people online really helped kind of add more to a game that's already been done before. So I give this game like an 8. Alright, then we got Sherlock Holmes Crimes and Punishment. This game is one of those games that I think a lot of people overlook in this generation, which is kind of the point and click or whodunit like mystery solving games. This game and Murder Soul Suspect are 2 that I find are highly underrated and kind of looked over. There's a couple more in these series and also a lot of them on the PC. If you're into murder mystery games at all, or enjoy a good murder mystery show but haven't played one of these games before, they're a lot of fun, so I definitely get into them if you could. This is a 7.7 in my opinion. Alright, next up is another new game for this collection video, and is Dead or Alive 6. I had an itch for a fighting game, and this kind of scratched it. This game is a decent Dead or Alive game. The combat plays pretty well. For those of you that don't know Dead or Alive, or compared to any other fighting game, it's one of those games where you play on like a 3D field and can kind of move forwards and backwards, not just left to right. And it's a little slower combat. It works more on juggle mechanics and kind of landing slower methodical combos instead of like these flashy super high speed combos where you're like bouncing off of walls and stuff like that. It's a good game. The campaign was kind of lackluster in this game. For the online or just playing like the arcade and stuff like that, it's still fun to play through. I'd recommend it if you're into the series or looking to get into it. I would recommend probably 5 over it. I'd give it a 7. Alright, next up is Destiny. This is a game that came out early in the PS4 life cycle and was a online kind of MMORPG first-person shooter developed by Bungie. It plays a lot like Halo, but there's PvE elements where you go around doing like raids and dungeons with people. When the servers were populated, it was a pretty fun game. I enjoyed doing the raids and doing strikes with friends, but the game really lacked content, and the content they added was really overpriced and really didn't add too much new into the game. So when it was populated, I give it a 5.5, but it's a 0 now because just everybody's on Destiny 2, and this game basically becomes a paperweight soon. Alright, next up is Deus Ex Mankind Divided. I really enjoyed the PS3 one of this, which was Human Revelations, I think. And I was really worried about if they were going to mess this up going into the new generation. But after playing this game, I really enjoyed it. It's basically like a stealth action game mixed with an RPG where you can kind of decide certain ways to do each mission. You can either run and gun it, or you can kind of stealth your way, or you can kind of do a mixture of both. The RPG mechanics are very good in this game. There's a lot of cool side quests. The main missions are interesting enough to keep you going. There's upgrade trees, and it's very sci-fi and futuresque. So I would highly recommend this game if you're looking for a good RPG to play. I'd give it an 8.2. Alright, next up is Doom. This is one of those games that's a true calling back to older times, where this game is really fast-paced and really just emphasizes that quick run and gun shooting that all of those old shooters really went for. It's very gory, there's a lot of good metal songs in it, and you basically go around shooting the crap out of demons. It's a lot of fun. The multiplayer is actually pretty decent. Kind of reminds me of a Unreal Tournament or Quake style multiplayer. So if you're into that and into shooters at all, I would highly recommend picking this up. If you haven't, there's also the new one that's out, which I haven't picked up yet, but am looking forward to picking up. This game's an 8.5. Alright, next up is Dragon Age Inquisition. This game I actually think they did pretty well with. I don't think it's as good as the original ones on the PS3, but for an RPG game, I thought this was pretty good. They did the mistake of forcing it open world, like they did with Andromeda, which is Mass Effect, but I think it benefits this game a little more than Mass Effect. Still a really solid RPG with some pretty cool campaign missions thrown in there. So I'd give this game like a 7.6. Alright, next up is Dying Light. Basically what this game is a first-person zombie hack and slash game, RPG, where you basically go around parkouring around and kind of trying to stop a zombie apocalypse that's happening. And there's a cool like upgrading your weapon system and your character, and really it's basically Dead Island, if you know what Dead Island is, but done right and with really cool parkour elements thrown in. It's a pretty solid game. I wouldn't say it's anything amazing, but you can also play co-op, so if you have a friend and want a fun co-op game to play, this is one I could recommend. I'd give it a 7.2. Alright, next up is Dynasty Warriors 8 Extreme Legends. So this is basically like a definitive edition of Dynasty Warriors Extreme Legends. I bought this thinking it was Empires because I'm very new to the Dynasty Warriors series and didn't know there was like 50 different versions of 8. But for what it is, it's a decent Dynasty Warriors game. The combat's fun, campaign's pretty decent. The kind of, I forget what it's called, but it's like an unending mode where you like level up a character. You have a little town that you level up and you go do missions to upgrade the town. I enjoyed that mode a lot, which was most of the time I spent in this game. If you know what Dynasty Warriors is, it's basically the same thing as you're getting. It's not a bad one. So I'd still recommend it. I give it a 7. Alright, next up is The Elder Scrolls Skyrim. This is a special edition, which is basically just slightly upgraded graphics, and it includes all the DLC. The main reason I got this is because the PS3 version, which is the original version I have, the load times are awful. And this game allows you to play it on the console with pretty good loading times, and really just kind of refines a lot of the issues that older generations copies of Skyrim's had. If you're getting Skyrim, Skyrim's a first-person RPG. It's one of the more well-known games, so I won't really explain it too much, but it's a very fun first-person RPG and is the game that got me into RPGs in general. If I was getting a version of Skyrim or recommending a version for somebody to get, I'd recommend the PS4 or Xbox One edition, or getting the PC version, which you could mod. I'd give this game a 9. It's one of my favorites. Alright, next up is Everybody's Golf. This is a golf game for the PS4, which is under the same series as the Hot Shots franchise. This is kind of just the Japanese name for it. They just decided to apply it to, I guess, all the versions of Hot Shots going forward. It still plays like a very good Hot Shots game. The same mechanics are all there. It's like a little bar. You press your power, and then you time it back with the tee, and that will determine how accurate your shot is. The golfing mechanics are simple enough that beginners can get into it and do pretty well. But to do good on the farther courses, you have to account for the wind, the roll of the courses, the way your ball lies, and it's a lot deeper. And if you're looking to get very good at the game, there's definitely a lot of more advanced mechanics that you need to learn to do the better courses. So I'd give this game an 8.5. Alright, next up is Fallout 4. How I always describe this game to people is it's a good RPG, but a bad Fallout game. And what I mean by that is the RPG mechanics are great. They updated the combat, so the first-person shooting and melee mechanics are a lot better compared to other Fallout games. Some of the quest lines are pretty good, and side quests are pretty good. The Far Harbor DLC, in my opinion, is the best part of this game. The companion system's still decent, but the RPG mechanics and general RPG mechanics, they've gutted and basically gotten rid of in this game. So the dialogue system and the perk trees all really got gutted and kind of hinder the experience of this game a lot. By getting rid of a lot of replayability, and a lot of the customization options of your character really mean nothing, because you can be a jack of all trades in this game. Overall, still a good game, and still would recommend people to play it. Just compared to other Fallout games like New Vegas and 3, I think it's a little weaker, so I give it an 8.1. Alright, so then we got Far Cry 4. This is basically Far Cry 3 reskinned with not as interesting as a bad guy. It's okay, nothing great. If you know the Far Cry games, first person shooter with some RPG mechanics built in, it's okay, I'd give it a 7. Far Cry 5, on the other hand, I think was actually really well done. The kind of culty vibes you get from Joseph Seed, who's the bad guy in this game, leads like a religious cult, and you're kind of working to slowly build up a resistance and destroy the cult. I think he's a very interesting bad guy. I think in terms of the Far Cry series, he's either the best or second best bad guy, which is Voss from 3 or him. In my opinion, I think this is one of the better Far Cry games, so I give it an 8. Then another new game to the collection is Far Cry New Dawn. I was kind of hesitant when I saw this coming out, because Far Cry games kind of follow the trend of one being good, next one being bad, one being good, next one being bad. So this one, it was okay. It's as average as a Far Cry game as you get. These two are the bad guys in the game. I think they call themselves like twin gods or something. I forget what they call themselves. But they basically lead some sort of like apocalyptic kind of like gang. And you're basically building up a resistance to this gang. The only thing that they added into this game that was interesting for me compared to the other Far Cry games is the base building element to it. I enjoy games that have like a hub base that you can develop, see grow throughout the game, upgrade it, which would give you certain advantages throughout the story or to your character. I definitely enjoy that about this game, but it's as average as a Far Cry game as you get. I'd give it a 6. Alright, next up is Final Fantasy Type 0 HD. This is a game that I recently played through. I think I finished playing through it like 2 weeks ago. And I can say this is definitely not going to be the Final Fantasy game that gets me into Final Fantasy. It's a PSP remaster on the PS4, and you can tell it's a PSP game. The dialogue's very boring. The characters are very boring. The combat's just kind of press square and lock on to things till you get a crit and things die. Everything basically one-shots you no matter your level. I give it like a 3. Alright, next is Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. This is definitely one of the more underrated and hidden gem games on the console. It is a beat-em-up game made by the same people who made the Yakuza series. So if you know the Yakuza series, you're getting the same kind of gameplay and atmosphere in these games. It's very fast-paced, bloody, gory action mixed with some cool campaign elements, some funny characters, and a lot of like cheesy humor built in. If you're looking for a really good beat-em-up game to get into and haven't heard of this game, I would highly recommend it. I'd give it an 8.3. Alright, the next up is Grand Theft Auto 5. In my opinion, this is actually one of the better Grand Theft Auto games I've played. I really didn't enjoy certain Grand Theft Autos. I thought they were decent. But I usually prefer the Saints Row games, which I know is kind of a controversial opinion. But this game I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed how the 3 stories of the main characters you play through really interconnected. The side missions were a lot of fun, and just driving around and collecting cars and doing all the little side missions to get more money was a lot of fun. I didn't really get into the GTA Online, so I'm personally just rating this off the campaign alone. But I give it like a 7.9. I really enjoyed this game, actually. Alright, next up is Homefront: The Revolution. This is probably one of the worst FPS games I've played on the PS4 when it came out, and still currently it is very buggy. They've patched it a bit, but it's still buggy and runs awfully. This game basically is a continuation of the Homefront game on the PS3, but instead they forced it open world and made it just really boring and got rid of the linear story driven game that was the first one, and kind of just turned it into like an open world sandbox-ish game with some monotonous, tedious side quests in it. It's not a good game. I'd give it a 3. Alright, the next up is Horizon Zero Dawn, the complete edition, which is basically, I waited until the game with all the DLC came out. This game is very good. I enjoyed this game a lot. I didn't finish it. I think I'm on the trials, where you're doing all those, for the lodge. It's like a hunter's lodge or something like that. There's like these little challenges you gotta do. I was trying to, platinum it, so I'm just taking a little break from it, from actually finishing the platinum. But I enjoyed the game. The combat's pretty good. It's like a mix of stealth and action, where there's some stealth mechanics built in like a third-person stealth way, kind of like Assassin's Creed almost. And then there's the third-person like bow shooting action mixed with some melee mechanics. If you've played the Shadow of Mordor games, it's very similar to that. I'd give it probably somewhere like an 8.1. Alright, next up is Infamous Second Son. In my opinion, this still holds up as one of the better exclusives for the PS4. If you don't know the Infamous games are third-person kind of beat-em-up fighting games, mixed with some third-person shooting and special like superpowers almost gameplay. You can kind of fly around or run up buildings or teleport through like smokestacks and stuff like that. And you basically play as a guy who gains superpowers and is being hunted by the government, who kind of is against supers because they believe them to be evil. And he's kind of trying to prove that supers are not evil, and kind of the government's kind of corrupt in this situation. I give it an 8.5. I really enjoyed playing this one. Alright, next up is Injustice 2. This is one I'm actually going to change the rating for. I originally gave it a 9. But overlooking all my games, and there's a video I'm working on where I'm kind of comparing a bunch of games from a bunch of different eras, I'm realizing that I enjoyed this game a lot more than I gave it credit for. So I'm going to give it a 9.3 instead. This is one of my favorite fighting games of all time. It's made by NetherRealms and follows the same kind of combat style as Mortal Kombat, except you don't block with a trigger button, you block by just backing up. and they add a lot of wall bounce mechanics, so there's a lot more juggling involved. I enjoy the superhero element. I enjoyed the campaign, which NetherRealm's really good at making good fighting game campaigns. And I really enjoy collecting all the different gear for all the different characters and customizing them. If you're looking for a fighting game to get into, I'd highly recommend this game. So I'm upgrading my rating from my last one, which was a 9, to a 9.3. Alright, next up is KILLZONE Shadowfall. This is actually the first game I ever got for the PS4. I actually got it before the PS4 actually came out because Best Buy sent it to me early, like preemptively before the PS4 came out when I pre-ordered it. I enjoyed this game. I think it's one of the weaker Killzone games. I would say 2 and 3 are probably the best. For those of you who don't know, Killzone games are first-person shooters. They're very, like, weighty, heavy feeling first-person shooters, but they're very solid. This game is decent. They're set in, like, futuristic things, so there's a lot of cool weapons and kind of, like, jetpacks and little robot guys you can use. It's a solid campaign playthrough. I don't think there's anybody playing multiplayer right now, so I'd give it a 7. Alright, next up is Knack. This is a puzzle kind of action game that came out early in the PS4 life cycle. It's definitely a kid-oriented game in terms of the story. It kind of plays like a Pixar movie. You basically play as this little robot here, and you can kind of collect more pieces as you destroy certain parts of the levels or certain enemies and become a bigger version of your kind of monster dude, and you become more powerful and can take more damage. The game's actually pretty hard for a kid's game. There's certain parts in this game where you just get one shot by everything and it kind of gets a little difficult. But if you're looking for a solid platformer with a okay story, it's very Pixar EX. I'd give it a 6. Alright, next up is The Last of Us Remastered. I really enjoyed this first game. I haven't played the second one, probably going to avoid it until it's a lot cheaper, just because I really haven't been buying new games unless I'm super hyped for them. But the remaster of Last of Us is basically just the same version you get on the PS3 with upgraded graphics a tiny bit, the load time's a little better, and it comes with the DLC. The Last of Us is a classic PlayStation exclusive, one of the best the PlayStation has ever offered. The story's really great. It's basically a zombie apocalypse where you're playing as Joel and Ellie here and trying to figure out kind of how to survive this, trying to get Ellie here to safety, and there's more. I don't really want to spoil a lot of the story for people who haven't played it, because I feel this is one where you have to play the entire story raw without knowing a lot of it to fully get the full experience with it. But just to know, it's a great game and a classic. I'm actually gonna up my rating from an 8.5 to a 9 for this game. Alright, now I got all my Lego games, so I'm gonna do this pretty quickly. First up, Lego The Hobbit. I enjoyed this game. I didn't think it was one of the better Lego games I've played. The kind of hub world was really uninteresting to me, but it kind of stays true to the Hobbit story and has some funny moments, so I give it a 5. Alright, next up is the Lego Movie video game. So this is based off of the movie, the Lego Movie, but it's a video game about it. So this game I thought was pretty decent. I actually really enjoy the Lego Movie. I thought it was a lot of fun. It kind of is just like a combination of a bunch of unique characters with some more famous characters from other Lego sets, or like Batman and stuff like that. It's a good game, very true to the story of the movie. It's basically like you're playing the movie. I'd give it a 5.5. Alright, next up is Lego Marvel Superheroes. In my opinion, this is one of the better Lego games I've played. This and the OG Star Wars ones are probably my favorite. What makes this game so good is I think the superpowers really loan themselves well to Lego and the Lego combat and kind of how they do these games. And also there's a really cool hub world where it's like a big open world city where you can kind of mess around and destroy stuff and test out all these different heroes and unlock more heroes for challenges. And I think it's one of those Lego games that actually adds a lot more than just the missions. So I'd give it a 7. Alright, next up is Lynchdom Battle Mage. If you watch my worst PS4 games of all time, this makes number 1. The reason for this is this game is buggy as all heck. It's basically like you're playing in molasses due to how bad the game is optimized, and the gameplay is basically it's basically a first-person mage game where you kind of create your own spells and learn different spells and go around defeating like undead enemies through a campaign, and there's some RPG elements. On paper, this game sounds pretty decent, and it's a decent idea, and it kept me interested for a bit just based off of the like crafting new abilities and stuff like that. But the lagginess, the load times, and how bad this game runs really ruined this game for me, so I'd give it a 3. Alright, the next we got Madden 18. I own 2 Madden games on the PS4, and this is the actual good one I own. I really enjoyed this game as a Madden game. The last one I got before this I think was 13 on the PS3. So it was a big jump for me in terms of all the graphics, the different modes and stuff like that. And the big thing with this game is they added this long shot campaign, which basically played as a QB being drafted through this new like game show and reality TV show that basically pitted you against other QBs rising up through the ranks. I thought that was very interesting and actually added an element to these Madden games that was kind of lacking beforehand. So I'd give this game a 6. I think it's a solid Madden game. Next up is Madden 25. This is as under average as a Madden game as you can get. It basically just has all the generic modes without like any of the cool like career elements to it, and lacking in certain basically everything I said about 18 is just lacking in that. So I'd give this game like a 4. Alright, next up is Marvel Spider-Man. This is another new game for the collection. This is the reverse cover, which I just prefer over the original. I think it looks pretty clean. This is a game that I feel did some things very well and did some games very poorly. The things I think it did really well is the combat. It's basically like a more refined version of the Arkham combat. I think the web mechanics add something new to this and kind of make it a little more fleshed out. The upgrading trees are pretty interesting. They definitely give you advantages if you go up certain upgrading trees early. It feels like your character is definitely evolving. I think Peter Parker and all the characters are portrayed really well. I think the story's okay. I think really just the ending of this game is pretty good. I think the story itself is a little lackluster at times in terms of the initial bad guy you face. The things I think this game did poorly: one, the story is decent, but the initial foe that you're facing for 3/4 of this game is very boring and is kind of just the generic, hey, I'm here to destroy the world, okay, that's my character arc type character. And then you actually get to the interesting character for the last like 2 missions, and the last boss fight with him is literally punch, 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 swing something at him, punch, 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 repeat, quick time event. Which leads to another issue I have with this game, is the boss fights are very boring and very easy. You basically find one pattern, rinse and repeat that one pattern, and then you win the boss fight. The side missions are very boring and tedious. They're fun for a bit, but then doing the same thing like 8 times in different areas gets a little tedious. They introduce a bunch of characters from the Spider-Man series like Black Cat and basically say, here's a little mission about them, you learn a little bit about them and what their intentions are in the game, and then basically you never hear from them again, besides having to buy DLC that expands on their story. So they're clearly just introducing characters to make money off of them. So overall, I'd probably give this game a 7.5. It does some things very well, and I'm excited for the Miles one on the PS5. I'm just hoping they kind of stay away from some of the bad practices in terms of their DLC and kind of make the story a little more interesting. Alright, next up is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. This is a game that kind of was underwhelming for me. I really enjoyed Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom, which is a fighting game, It was very fast paced and 3v3 and just had cool action. The arcade mode was awesome. This game turns it into 2v2, which is fine, but basically makes the combat very slow and doesn't have that same quick pace to it. And the arcade mode is very poorly done in this game, and the campaign's kind of wishy-washy. Overall, I'd give this game a 4. It's an under-average fighting game, but not awful. I would say if you're still into fighting games heavily or enjoyed the other Marvel vs. Capcom games, I'd still say give it a shot. Alright, next up is Mass Effect Andromeda. This is probably, on the PS4, my biggest disappointment game. I'm a huge Mass Effect game. The original 3 are some of my favorite games of all time, with 2 probably being my second favorite game of all time. For those of you who don't know, the Mass Effect games are basically third-person shooting RPGs. They're very heavy on story-driven missions that are linear and very big on character development and learning about your characters and having them interact and learning about your crew and building up relationships with them. That's a big part of these games. But basically what this game does is throws all of that out the window, turns it open world when it shouldn't have been, and basically has a bunch of very dry and boring characters in it. I'd give it a 4 because they've refined the combat, and the combat's a little better, but basically everything else is very lackluster. Alright, so next up is Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes. This is basically a tech demo they released at full price. This is like one of the biggest scams of all time, and if this was a demo, I'd give it like a 7 because the combat's pretty decent and the one mission's kind of fun. But the mission's like 15 minutes long and you can finish it really quick, and it's basically made you pay for something that should have been free. So it's a 1. Alright, next up is Metal Gear Solid The Phantom Pain. I didn't ever really finish this game, and I don't really have interest in going back to it. If I ever get the feeling to play a stealth game, I might go back to it. What I did play about it, it was solid. It's a solid Metal Gear game, which is basically a third-person stealth game. It's fun. I hate the open world element to it. I hate that trend of everything being forced open world just because open world games are popular at the moment. It's still a decent game. The side missions get very repetitive, but I give it an 8. Alright, next up is Metro Redux. This is basically a combination disc of Metro 2033 and Metro Last Light, which are post-apocalyptic first-person shooters for the PS3 and Xbox 360, I'm pretty sure. For a single-player campaign first-person shooter, I would highly recommend these games. The campaign's really interesting. It's one of those games where you have to manage your ammo, make sure you're saving up and not using too much during fights, so you either choose to run through some things or fight. The campaign's pretty decent. They introduce some alright characters, and it's more about the atmosphere these games create. They're very dark and kind of sinister atmospheres that they do really well. I'd give this game like an 8.1. Alright, next up is Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. This game is basically a combination of Assassin's Creed stealth mechanics, Arkham City combat mechanics, and the exploration of kind of a Uncharted or modern Lara Croft Tomb Raider game. It does all these things very well and puts them into the Lord of the Rings kind of realm. It basically follows one of the, I think it's one of the Rangers, as he looks to destroy, I think it's an ally of Sauron or something like that. I haven't played this game in a very long time. But what I remember, it was pretty solid. The only thing I really didn't like about this game was the ending and the last boss fight. I gave this game a 7.5 when I originally rated it, but I think I'd up it to an 8. I think I was a little harsh on it. It does all the things pretty well, and if you're into Lord of the Rings or any of those games I previously mentioned, you'll definitely get a good play out of this. Alright, so next up is Minecraft. Everybody knows Minecraft. It's basically Legos but in a video game. You go around creating stuff, building bases. You can go around trying to find the Ender Dragon, which is the last boss, and kill him. But basically you buy this game to mess around and build some stuff in. The limitations of the PS4 is basically that it's not infinite, I'm pretty sure, and it's just a lot easier to play on the PC, and it runs a bit better. So I'd give it a 7.5. Alright, next up is Monster Hunter World. This game is basically a hack and slash game that is basically around fighting bosses. So you basically go around as a monster hunter, as the title implies, and you fight like dragons, mythical creatures, like little, like, I don't know, they're kind of like lizard dudes, and basically collect all the gear and items and crafting materials and create weapons, gear that will help you advance your character and continue through the story. It's one of those games that if you have friends to play with, it's decently fun, but solo it is incredibly boring. So I'd give it a 7.5. Alright, next up is Merciful Suspect. As I said before, I think this is one of the more overlooked games on the PS4. It's basically a game that's kind of like a murder mystery, point and click game, but you move around and there's some stealth mechanics in it. It's basically about you solving your own murder and trying to figure out, one, why you're stuck in purgatory and still on Earth after you died, and two, how to solve who actually figured out who murdered you and kind of help with that. It's very interesting, very well done. I'd give it an 8. Alright, next we got all my basketball games, so I'm just going to rhyme these off pretty quick. NBA 2K14, I think one of the better 2K games, has I think one of the best My Career modes in it. I'd give it a 7. 2K16, probably one of the better 2K games. It's average for a basketball game that I've played, but I give it a 5. I think it's one of the better 2K games still though. Next up is 2K20. This is a new one for me. I bought it thinking I could get back in the 2K series. Really, these games have gotten too greedy for me. The amount of time it takes you to level up and actually get anywhere with your character is insane, and the amount of money it costs to buy cards or to upgrade your character is nuts. So these games, I'm just kind of getting tired of playing them. So I give this game like a 4. NBA Live 18. I think this is one of the better NBA games I've played on the console. I think the career mode and street career elements of it were really fun, and it's really fun to play with friends, and it's a good pace level up. It doesn't feel like you're taking forever to get your character leveled up, so I'd give it a 7. Alright, next up is NBA Live 19. This is basically takes everything that they did well in 18 and basically throws it out the window. There's still the career and street elements to it, but they made it a lot, I would say, uninteresting to level up. A lot of the custom like t-shirts and clothing you could unlock for your character is out the window, and the leveling up mechanics and the online co-op mechanics just aren't as good in this game, so I'd give it a 3. Alright, we're on the final stack now. This is NBA 2K Playgrounds 2. I actually really enjoy this game. I think if you were to get a 2K basketball game, I would prefer this over the actual 2K games. It's basically like a NBA Jam style of basketball game, and I think it's one of the only arcadey basketball games on the PS4 in this generation. And it's actually done really well. You earn characters pretty quickly, packs are pretty easy to get, and you level up your characters fairly quick just by playing some games in the career mode and kind of doing these challenges, which are easy enough to do and just require a little bit of grinding. Another benefit to this game is it's a great co-op game, so if you have a friend to play through, you can play entire seasons together and just mess around. Overall, I think it's a lot of fun. I give it a 7.5. Alright, next up is Need for Speed Rivals. I enjoy the Need for Speed games. I think this is one of the better ones I've played. This is basically one that has the cops and street racer elements to it, so you either play as a cop, and it kind of has like takedown elements to it where you're kind of just trying to stop racers and stop races going on, and the racer side is you basically either do the street races, time trials, or escaping the cops. So it's interesting to play. It has a good open world area to it, but it's probably not the best Need for Speed games. I prefer some of the older ones. So I'd give it a 6.5. Alright, next up is NHL 15. This is probably the worst NHL game I've ever played. I do enjoy the NHL games, but this one is basically the one that was released on the PS3 while the PS4 was coming out. So they basically pushed out a PS4 version of NHL 15. And basically this game guts basically all the main features of an NHL game in order to just get this out before the PS4 early life cycle was done. This game's awful, don't get it. If I was getting an NHL game, I would get any other one. I was like a 2. Alright, next up is Nier Automata. This is a game I recently played through, and I actually really enjoyed. This game is basically a third-person hack-and-slash beat-em-up RPG. You basically play as 3 different characters, which are these 3 at the front. They're basically androids that are controlled by this giant server in the sky, and you're basically going around fighting the robot enemies off, and then learning more about the androids themselves, the robots themselves, and it's kind of like this big interconnected story, which you're learning little more pieces and pieces as you complete each of their respective campaigns. It's very interesting. It's one of those games that I actually bothered to go through all 3 different campaigns just to keep learning about the story because it was so interesting. I'd give this game probably somewhere around like an 8.5. Alright, next up is the game I'm currently playing now, which is, I'm going to butcher this, Onichanbara Chaos, I think. The reason I got this game, I thought it was going to be like a Lollipop Chainsaw, but a Japanese version of it. It's okay. It's a hack and slash game, definitely. You basically play as 4 different girls. 2 of them are, I think, are vampires. 2 of them are some sort of other beast or whatever. And you basically go around killing a bunch of zombies. The fighting mechanics are okay. It's more of just a generic spam your one combo that you know till infinity, till you beat the level type of hack and slash games. But the boss fights are fun because they have like varying different attacks and you have to kind of play around them. Overall, I'd probably give this game like a 7. Alright, next up is the Order 1886. This is a PS4 exclusive, and this is like the steelbook, like collector's edition of it. So basically, this game is a third-person shooter game that's very heavily story-driven. So basically, you're like this group of, I guess hunters is the right word, and you go around hunting like monsters that are in this era. I think it's like somewhere in London in, well, obviously 1886. This game is definitely heavily reliant on story. I found the story very interesting, especially near the end. A lot of the gripes about this game, especially it being too short and having a lot of forced like watching combat scenes instead of actually playing, are all true. It's just, I find the story of this very interesting, and it kind of held my interest through the entire game. I just wish it was a little bit longer, so I'd give it a 7. Alright, next up is Outer Worlds. This was one of the games I was very excited to come out last year, and I was actually pleasantly surprised about this game. This is a RPG made by Obsidian. For those of you who don't know, they made the New Vegas Fallout game, and that was the main reason I was super excited for it, because I knew they were going to make a solid RPG. This game is basically a first-person shooter space RPG. So you basically play as this one person who released from, I think, a spaceship with a bunch of cryo chambers on it, and you're basically learning about the world in the future and how each like government agency and company has kind of created their own worlds and how they all interconnect story-wise. And there's a bunch of different characters you get on your crew, and there's a bunch of different level up elements, different gear to loot and stuff like that. It's basically Fallout, but in space, and I really enjoyed this game. I'd probably give it somewhere around like an 8.7. Alright, next up is Persona 5. This is a game that I have a controversial opinion on. I think Persona 4 is a lot better than this game. I think this game does a lot of things really well. I think the combat's still really good, the music's great, the art style is amazing, and I think overall the story's decent. I just think the story and characters are a little drier than Persona 4. So I didn't actually finish this game. I plan to go back to it soon. I think I'll probably go back and finish my playthrough after I finish my second Fire Emblem playthrough, which I'm playing through right now. I'd give it like an 8. I think it's still a good Persona game, and I definitely see why people would prefer it over 4. It's just, in my opinion, 4 is the better one. Alright, next up is a really interesting game. This is a Bethesda game called Prey. It's basically like Bioshock in space. So basically you play as an engineer that's on this spaceship that's harboring, I think it's like some certain alien like entity on it. And basically that gets released, and you're trying to figure out who you are because all your memories are wiped, and trying to figure out what's going on with this spaceship. There's a bunch of mysteries on it. It has the same kind of Bioshock-esque action to it, where you have powers mixed with first-person shooting. There are a ton of guns to get and to upgrade throughout this game. And it's one of those games where you have to watch your ammo and kind of choose to fight or not fight in certain situations to kind of save up like medkits, ammo, and certain resources in order to craft stuff. It's a very interesting game. I'd give it a 7.7. Alright, next up is Ratchet & Clank. So it's a remaster of the first Ratchet & Clank and kind of more follows suits with the movie that came out. I think it's a 1-for-1 from the movie. In my opinion, I prefer this over the original just because of how smooth this is compared to the original on the PS2. I think this is one game that they did really well with the remaster, and I think the better handling and better specs of the PS4 helps this game out a lot by making everything just smoother, the combat smoother, the jumping mechanics feel a little less kind of clunky at times, and the art style is great in this game. The original's still amazing, still a classic. All of them are really good in the series, but in my opinion, I think this one deserves a lot of the praise it gets as a really solid remaster of a game, so I give it an 8.5. Alright, so next up is Saints Row 4. This has the Get Out of Hell DLC in it as well. I enjoyed this game. Saints Row 4 is a lot of fun. If you're looking for a good co-op game to play, I would highly recommend getting this. For those of you who don't know the Saints Row series, it's basically like a goofy, taking itself super unseriously version of Grand Theft Auto. It's basically a giant open world, and you play as a leader of a gang, and you basically go around in certain other games destroying other gangs and kind of taking over cities. In this one, you play as the President of the United States, and you get taken over by aliens, and you go around destroying aliens in like a simulation, and you basically have superpowers. It's very out in left field, but if you're into that, it's a lot of fun. I give it an 8. Alright, then we got Shadow Warriors. Shadow Warriors is basically like Doom in that it's a very good callback to the OG arcadey shooter games, which is just a lot of gore, a lot of fast-paced shooting, a lot of just hair-trigger gameplay, where you're walking around just shooting the crap out of stuff, making stuff explode, finding health packs on the ground, a solid challenge in the game, and some funny dialogue to get you through the story. This is another game you're playing for the combat and kind of the cheesy story to it. It has an okay story, with some really cool boss fights in it, actually. So I'd give this game like a 7.7. Alright, next up is MLB The Show 19. I basically had a craving for a baseball game, so I picked this up 2 years ago. I enjoyed this game. I think it's a solid baseball game. I'm not one that plays baseball games too often. I think the last one before this was one on the PSP I played. So I'm not one to judge it with other baseball games, but as somebody who's a casual to these games, it was pretty fun. So I'll give it a 6. Alright, next up we got Soul Calibur. I guess it's 6, if I know my numerals correctly. This is basically a solid Soul Calibur game. I enjoyed playing this game. I think the combat's still good. For those of you who don't know Soul Calibur is like Dead or Alive, where it's like the 3D plane of fighting. But it relies a lot more on, has swords and stuff like that instead of just punching and kicking. What you're playing Soul Calibur for, at least for me, is one, the story's pretty decent. I enjoyed playing through the story in this game. Not as much as 5, but it was still fun. The character creation, where you can create your own characters in this, is still pretty in-depth, and one of the fun things about this game is creating a bunch of goofy characters and going online and fighting people with your goofy characters. And adding Geralt in the game was pretty cool because I'm a huge Witcher fan, so seeing him in this game was awesome. I'd still give this game like a 7.5. I think it's a solid fighting game, just not my favorite out of the Soul Calibur series. Alright, then we got South Park: The Fractured Butthole. If you are a fan of South Park or enjoy crude humor at all, you will really love this game. And the one for the PS3, which is the Stick of Truth. So basically these games are like playing a South Park episode, but a very long one. So this one kind of makes fun of the Marvel and DC universes. And for those of you who don't know anything about South Park is basically a very, very crude comedy show that basically looks like a cartoon and follows kids around on a bunch of just weird adventures. So if you're into crude comedy or enjoy the South Park games, you'll get a kick out of these games. If not, I'd stay away from them. I really enjoy South Park, so I give it an 8.9. Alright, next up is Thief. This is basically a continuation or kind of restart to the classic Thieves stealth games. This game does it very poorly though, in that the stealth combat and stealth mechanics are very gimmicky. It's basically if you're in the dark or shadows, you're invisible and nothing sees you. And if you're in the light, somebody from 3 football fields away will instantly spot you out. And the story kind of just goes off super hard in the left field all of a sudden near the end. So overall, this is just not a good stealth game. I give it like a 4. Alright, next up is Tomb Raider Definitive Edition. This is the first of the kind of restart and remaster of the Tomb Raider franchise. So this basically takes the original Tomb Raider format and basically turns it into Uncharted. It's basically like playing Uncharted with Lara Croft in it. It's a lot of fun. I think the story in this was actually pretty decent. It's good third-person stealth and action combat mixed in. I'd give it a 7.5. Alright, next up is another new one for me, and one I was super excited when they announced and really glad it worked out. And that is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2. So this is a remaster of the original 1 and 2 Tony Hawk Pro Skater games. And this is 100% how you do a remaster. The game plays exactly like the originals. The sound effects, the audio, the music, the characters, the tricks, all play like the original. It's awesome to see. They added new characters, and so it adds more to the game, not just taking stuff away and changing it. They just added more onto the original game. They added the online features, the challenges. You can create your own skate parks in it, which the create a skate park mode is actually very easy to use and a lot of fun. This is 100% how you do a remaster correctly. I love this game and I play it all the time now. I would probably give this game somewhere like a 9.2. Alright, next up is Vampire. This is definitely one of the hidden gems on this console. This game, basically you play as a doctor who basically recently turns into a vampire, and you're trying to figure out how he's coming to terms with his power, if he's going to use them for good or evil, and kind of learning to live with his thirst for blood and need for blood, mixing with him trying to save lives. So there's choices in this game, but it's basically the classic, just you choose choices, you're the good guy, you choose choices, the bad guy. There's not a lot of complexity to the choices, but the game is solid. The campaign's really good. It has some good side quests, and the atmosphere this game creates is really well done. It's a kind of third-person Witcher style hack and slash RPG. I'd give it an 8.1. Alright, next up is The Walking Dead Season 2. Telltale games are basically like walking around for a bit, then you do a quick time event, then you do some quick choices in terms of dialogue which affect the story going forward. But really, looking into it, they don't affect the story at all. It's basically just determining what side characters live or die and kind of what dialogue choices are said throughout the story. The stories are still really well done in terms of they keep you interested. They just give an illusion of more choice than you actually get in these games. So I'd give this one like a 7. Alright, next up is Watch Dogs. This is basically a Grand Theft Auto Saints Row style of game where it's a third-person shooter. with a vast open world that you can mess around in. Basically, you play as a hacker, and you can try to control like traffic lights, traffic cones, different things in like vehicles, and you use that all to your advantage throughout the world. That part's has a lot of interesting elements you can do to it, and there's a decent customization tree for your character. I would say this is nowhere near as good as a Grand Theft Auto or Saints Row, but it's definitely good for a playthrough. I give it a 6. Alright, next up is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. I'm currently actually playing through the DLCs for this game, and it's great to go back to this game. I enjoy this game a lot. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Originally, when I rated this game, I gave it a 9.3. I will probably be upping that to a 9.5. This game is a third-person RPG. It's basically like a hack and slash kind of combat game to it, but a slow, like methodical one, mixed with some powers which are known as signs. He plays Geralt. He's a witcher. He goes around hunting monsters, and there's like a more grander story going on as well during this time. And you also play as another witcher called Ciri, and she has her own story that's tied into Geralt's story. This is one game I don't want to spoil too much for people who haven't played it, because the story in this game is just amazing, and playing through it is like one of those games that's actually like an experience playing through it. So yeah, I give this game a 9.5. It's one of my favorite of all time. Alright, then we got Wolfenstein New Order. This is a classic callback to another one that focuses on the old style of shooting, where it's very fast paced. The combat is great in this game. Story's pretty decent. These games are about if the Nazis won World War II and kind of took over, and you're kind of playing as a resistance going around and fighting back. It's a pretty interesting game, very linear, but I think the linearness holds well with this game. And I think I'm going to up my rating as a 7.3 to an 8 for this game. I think it's pretty solid. I think the shooting's pretty good. And for a single player, story-driven first-person shooter on the PS4, I think this is one of the better ones. Alright, next up is WWE 2K15. The more modern version of WWE games, I think, are nowhere near as good as the like WWE SmackDown vs. Raw games. I think they kind of lose their charm. They've kind of basically become more like the MMA or NBA games, where it's basically you do your little career mode, upgrade your character with coins you get and money you get, and then basically the only fun thing to do is the quick matches, where you just do like the standard, like pick your match, pick your characters you want to fight and fight. Or there's the WWE universe, where you basically can make your own storylines and kind of control the WWE network, kind of like from a GM standpoint. Overall, the combat in this is very dumbed down compared to the SmackDown vs. Raw ones, and I just don't find them as interesting, so I'd give it a 5. And then the last two games are two Yakuza games. I have finally gotten into the Yakuza games. These ones come with a little sleeve. This is Yakuza Kiwami, which is a remaster on the PS4, and these games are amazing. I'm really glad I got into them. They're beat 'em up games that have really deep RPG elements to it, and really fun and expansive open worlds that have some great side quests to them. There's some that are super serious, some that are just flat out ridiculous, and there's a good contrast throughout this game of the serious story mixed with all the fun and wacky side missions that you get to do. This game's amazing. Anybody who hasn't played this, I would highly recommend getting into these games. I give this game like a 9. The next up, my last one, is Yakuza 0. Basically, everything I said about Kiwami, add this to this game, and then make the story a little more interesting, and add the ability to play as Majima as well, which is this guy. You're not just playing as Kiryu, who's the main character, you're playing as Majima as well. Add 3 new fighting styles, really cool real estate and cabaret club elements, where these two own their respective businesses, and you're kind of going through upgrading the businesses and earning money that way, and being able to add it to either your characters to upgrade their abilities, or put into business to grow the amount of income you get. So there's a lot of choices in this game, and it really feels like you have a lot to grind and grow throughout this game. The characters are awesome, they interact really well with each other, story is amazing, and the side missions in this game are some of the best side missions I've ever played in a video game. They're just so out there and unique, each one of them. You can like remember each of the side missions even after you play this game. It's not one of those games where you just forget the side missions and remember the main stories. It's just really well done. I say this game's slightly better than Kiwami, so I'd give it a 9.2. Alright, so there you have it. That is my PS4 collection for 2020. Definitely let me know some games that I haven't picked up or haven't played yet that I should get, because the PS5 is coming out soon. So I'll be looking to expand on my PS4 collection a lot, because the prices for these games will start to drop drastically. So I'll be looking for deals on those. So definitely let me know some games that I don't have that are definitely worth checking out. Really appreciate it if you stuck through the entire video or even watched just parts of the video. My next video that I'm looking to put out is another pickup video, so that will cover all the different new things I've picked up through all these different collection videos I've been talking about, and some things that I haven't talked about in collection videos yet. Then I'm looking to put out my second Hidden Gems video for the PS3, and then I got a special series I'm looking to start on my channel, which I'm really excited for. So really appreciate it if you've stuck through the whole thing, and remember, everybody has some nerdiness at their core.